Hello. So, continuing on with our rundown or list of inspirational Christian women, we're going to look at Elizabeth Fry. I guess she's in the consciousness of the British people only in as much as she was once commemorated on the £5 note. Other than that, prison reformers, I guess, will know of her. She's not too widely known, unfortunately, now. So anywho, I can see the chat and I'm just going to crack on. So her significant dates, i.e. her birth and her death, were 1780 to 1845. And good morning. She eventually became a prison reformer. She visited Newgate, which was, I feel like potentially it was a debtor's prison, but that's just in my brain somewhere. And the results of what she saw fundamentally changed her. Her life at that time wasn't utterly set in things of God. However, well, I think maybe it was actually, but she had a tumultuous journey. Either way, the hundreds of women that she saw, the babies who were present, because women were incarcerated with their babies at that time, the filth, the fact that she witnessed a dead baby having their clothes removed in order to keep warm a live baby, the buckets of filthy water, the toilet conditions, the filthy straw that served as like some means of hygiene, I guess, or comfort, neither of which played out. She struggled with that view. And the day after she had been there, and that day she went home, took a bath, changed her clothing. But the next day she went back, and this time she went back armed, I don't think is overstating it, with warm baby clothes, clean straw blankets, and her indomitable spirit. So she and a friend who accompanied her this time distributed these supplies, these gifts. They helped to dress the babies in the warm flannel clothing. They comforted the mothers. Her lifelong ministry was as a prison reformer, and it began basically then. So she wasn't, like, God's providence is pretty amazing. She wasn't at all, even by those who knew her, an obvious choice, as it were, an obvious candidate for like what was grueling and emotionally distressing work, such as that she took on. She was considered herself delicate as a child. She suffered throughout her life, as so many of these women now, I come to think of it. Sorry, I'm just going to cancel this call. So she suffered anxiety, illness of one form or another, and depression. It can genuinely be said that these things plagued her throughout her life. Nervousness, stomach upset, which often accompanies nervousness, remorseless toothache, all these things combined and conspired, I guess, to isolate her from her siblings, from her peers, from other people. These other people found her to be withdrawn, shy, socially awkward. And at 13, Elizabeth's mother died, and this compounded what was already a nervous and, as I said, awkward young lady. And her self-isolation intensified greatly at this point. And there's a quote: "Her dark moods hung like thunderclouds over the house and created an oppressive atmosphere." So spiritually, she also struggled. She was inclined toward religion, and yet struggled with what she considered to be worldly temptations. And she was torn between between doing what was right and doing what felt right. And when she did succumb or allow herself to enjoy things such as dancing or socializing, within her journal that she kept for many years, she would rebuke herself, for frivolity. She also, it should be noted, struggled from extended periods of skepticism. And she says, my mind is so much inclined to skepticism and enthusiasm that if I argue and doubt, I shall be a total skeptic. And this is another journal entry. If on the contrary, I give way to it and, as it were, wait for religion, I may be led away. So she's recognising her frailties and her limitations, as it were. So in the midst of all of this conundrum, she met the American Quaker William Savery, and he had come to England to preach at a meeting of friends, which is a Quaker term for like a service. And as she sat there at the front, and as she listened to him advocate for peace, Elizabeth was enchanted, I guess is the word. He inspired in her a new and I guess a religious fervour, and she was attracted to him, even though he was married. I always feel quite a palpitation at my heart at the sound of his voice, she admitted only to her journal. She realised that religion, combined with her feelings for Savery, there was a dangerous connection between them. She says, I shall always love religion through him, but must always love it away from him. And she wrote that before leaving London. It was a pretty radical response. And she returned to her hometown of Earlham. So her father, you'll remember her mother is deceased at this point. Her father and her siblings were, sort of, it's overstating it to say alarmed, gobsmacked, and worried by this sudden piety that she began to display. And to them, at least, it was obvious that something had transformed her. She eschewed luxuries. She wasn't having it. She refused to go shopping with her sisters for, silk gowns and slippers and stuff. She read the Bible almost constantly. She also abstained from singing, from dancing, and to top it off, she began to attend meetings twice on Sundays in the tradition of the Plain Quakers, which is a subset. Still, however, she remained conflicted. She didn't wish to alienate her family by adopting the thee and the thou language of the Quakers, whom she greatly admired. She did, on occasion, succumb to or acquiesce to her family's pressure to go dancing and to go to the occasional party. But for the most part, she remained firm in her hope and aspirations to adopt the plain Quaker life. Even acting right will sometimes bring dissensions in a family, she said in her journal. She finally convinced her father and her siblings that her Quakerism was not a fad or a whim or a passing fancy. And by the time she met her future husband, who was a Quaker also, and a banker who was called Joseph Fry, she was essentially a plain Quaker in her speech, in her dress, in her heart, and they married in 1800. She didn't, not unusually, she didn't adapt well to married life. She found her in-laws to be narrow-minded, pretty coarse, and not even a little bit religious enough for her. She also became irritated with the lack of business acumen that her husband displayed, his interest in chess, that irritated her, his constant humming, it's the big things. And also the fact that he had non-religious reading material. Also, the fact that he spent money frivolously, needlessly, in her opinion. She was agitated. She was restless. She was bored, basically. She was not having it one bit. She became increasingly frustrated with her inability to manage the household, i.e. the servants and her husband. I'm going to throw that one out there, I reckon. And she also became fatigued with the frequency of her responsibility to host parties and house guests and entertain, as we call it. Becoming a mother didn't, in this instance, do anything to ease the dissatisfaction that she felt with her life and her current situation. And this is something that I don't know that the men in the chat or who watch this video after, unless they've experienced it through their partners. This is the thing. After every birth, and there were multiple, she suffered from postpartum depression, which is, it's massive. It's one of the most frightening, and it's just awful. And this is every birth. And it often lasted for 6 months at a time. And it wouldn't have helped one bit in the fact that, she was an anxious mother. So that was exacerbated, certainly. And she would worry and fret over every, the tiniest ailment. And by the time she was 24, she had 3 children under the age of 5. That's not counting the potentially 18 months worth of postpartum depression. And at this stage, or round about this time, she questioned whether or not this was her lot in life, whether she would ever have a role that stretched beyond wife and mother. It does appear to me as if I might become the careworn and oppressed mother, she wrote in her journal. On her 8th wedding anniversary, she wrote this: various trials of faith and patience have been permitted me. My course has been very different from what I expected. And instead of being, as I had hoped, a useful instrument in the church militant, here I am, a careworn wife and mother, outwardly nearly devoted to the things of this life. So 9 years after she was married, in 1809, her father died. And this changed the entire course of her life. Previous to this, she had regularly attended Quaker meetings, but she had never publicly testified to her faith. And of those times when she was tempted, I guess is the word, when she felt the inclination to get up and testify publicly, she became so overwhelmed with anxiety that her body would physically and uncontrollably shake. And she also recorded that she feared at these times she would faint. The death of her father somehow, and his lifelong disapproval, frankly, of her religious choices, this freed her. His passing freed her to be able to speak without the amateur dramatics, without the fear. And she felt, this is what she wrote anyway, like a bottle that has been corked up and pressed down, and now there is an opening inside. There is much to run out. And the day that her father was buried, she wrote this: I think this will make way for me in some things that have been long on my mind. And shortly after the funeral, she began to speak. at meetings, and she continued to speak at Quaker meetings for the rest of her life. So now we're in 1811, and this is a month after she gave birth to her 7th child. At this point, she was formally acknowledged as a minister by the Society of Friends. So her brothers, Daniel and John, disapproved of her, pretty much all of it, the public speaking, etc. And her sisters also joined in the chorus and criticised her for neglecting her family. However, her husband supported her, and in a practical and pragmatic expression of support, he began to take on more and more of the responsibilities of the house, whilst Elizabeth travelled further and further from home. And when Stephen Grellet, who was an aristocrat, a French aristocrat, who'd settled in America and converted to the Society of Friends, the Quakers, when he visited Newgate Prison in 1813, and was witness firsthand to the utterly degrading, appalling conditions, that's an understatement as well, he almost immediately thought of and summoned Elizabeth, who was already at that point well known for her compassion towards the poor of London. And by 1817, so this is 4 years later, she had firmly established herself as London's foremost prison reformer. A snapshot of the time would be helpful maybe at this stage, because she did advocate and was not frequently successful initially, because the boards of governors that she would have approached and the relevant bureaucrats who fashioned the penal system that we had at that time, which again was awful. She didn't, with individuals, she didn't seem to have much sway, but she did advocate for better prison conditions, unsurprisingly. And this included adequate food, adequate clothing, a little more space. She persuaded, further to this, she persuaded the authorities to allow her, and this was fundamentally one of the greatest things that she ever did certainly for women's prison conditions, up to this day. There have been many, I'd say progressions, but when things start out substandard and are brought up to something reasonable, it's not really a giant leap forward, as it were. However, she was allowed to launch an educational program for imprisoned women and their children. This was unheard of. Trying to actually assist prisoners in not coming back just wasn't a thing. It was solely punishment. Nowadays, the British prison system, in essence, is rehabilitative. The figures don't really always attest to that, but it's in there as a thing, as it were. But in those days, it was solely as a deterrent and a punishment, a real punishment, deprivation, potentially death just by being there, let alone capital punishment. And the male authorities, they refused her. I mean, they allowed her the educational program. They refused to help her run the school. And therefore, she organised the Association for the Improvement of the Female Prisoners at Newgate. And this organisation consisted in its hierarchical structure of 12 Quaker women who alternated daily visits into the walls of Newgate in order to deliver this program. And this program included an introduction to the scriptures. It also included an initiative whereby the prisoners could earn some small amount of money for needlework. And Elizabeth also managed somehow to enlist the unanimous consent by the inmates when it came to formulating and instituting the 12 rules of this program. And these included appointing a supervising matron, allotting a period in the morning and the evening for reading scriptures, assigning specific work tasks, the prohibition of all cursing, gaming, card playing, quarrelling, immoral conversation, begging, and improper reading materials. And this could be, just novels or plays. And each and every of the 12 rules was separately voted on by show of hands, and unanimity is pretty rare, like I say, but she engendered this amount of support and cooperation. And in fact, these rules were later adapted slightly for use in prisons all across Europe. And as her work progressed and became more fruitful, she incrementally became increasingly opposed to capital punishment, the death penalty. Another snapshot of history. At this time, British people, certainly English people within the English penal system, could be executed for more than 200 separate offences. These ranged from the ridiculous, one could be executed for stealing a pair of stockings. Seriously. Passing a forged banknote. Stuff that today would potentially be dealt with civilly as opposed to criminally. Or at least, would not even elicit a custodial sentence. She personally, albeit unsuccessfully, campaigned for Charlotte Newman and Mary Ann James, who were both hanged as a result of being convicted of forgery. About 12 months later, she and her brother John both advocated for one of her favourite prisoners, who was named Harriet Skelton, who had formerly been a maid and was also later executed for the passing of forged banknotes. And she now considered fully that capital punishment was evil. It was an evil practice, and also that it produced evil results. And she declared this to the House of Commons Committee on London Prisons publicly. And the committee listened, certainly. I mean, they were stuck there in the chair, but they did not change their minds at that stage. The success of her prison reforms made her famous at that time across Britain and beyond Britain. It also drew, unsurprisingly, fierce criticism. The media, them, gossips, anywhere in between, suggested, I don't even see this as really an insult, but I can see the tone of voice that they meant in. They suggested that the family had sent 6 of their 9 children off to relatives just so that Elizabeth would be free to pursue her prison work. And it was true to say that several of her children lived away from home for a few months. This was not in order that she could pursue her prison reform work. It was because the family were financially suffering. You may remember she had become increasingly irritated at the beginning of her marriage with her husband's poor business sense. She, however, never made excuses or answered the critics, as it were. She believed that her divine calling was prison reform. She allowed nothing, as one would respect and expect, not her own health, the ailments that she suffered with continuously, not her family, not the public opinion, the government. She allowed nothing to stand in the way of what God had, or what she felt God had given her to do. She published in 1827 a small book, and the title of this is Observations on the Visiting, Superintendence and Government of Female Prisoners. Within the text, she advocated for the role of women in society. No person will deny the importance attached to the character and conduct of a woman in all her domestic and social relations when she is filling the station of a daughter, sister, a wife, a mother, or a mistress of a family, she wrote. But it is a dangerous error to suppose that the duties of females end here. Go on, Elizabeth. Sorry. So she suggested that women could and should make a profound impact in ministering not only to female prisoners, but also to those in hospitals, in workhouses, which were rife at the time, and in what we now know as the psychiatric secure estate, or asylums, as they were then known and feared. She readily accepted that there was just like so much work to be done. And she believed that, that engendering the support of and compassion and work ethic of, sisters, as it were, other ladies, was, could be nothing other than beneficial. And it was a radical statement and assertion and proposal that she made. And it somewhat reflects the belief that she held that, she was in a divine calling and that this was a personal necessity for her to be engaged in this work. So in 1828 now, she's been married 28 years, of course, and her family suffered a massive setback in terms of providing assistance when they were forced to declare themselves bankrupt. And because she was a well-known figure, the rumour mill started up. And Elizabeth was quite openly accused of funneling money from her husband's account in order to assist the Newgate Association and other charities with which she was associated. And while she waited for the bailiffs to come and inventory all of the property, she recorded loads of stuff in her journal, but she just took a moment to, make a special note of her surroundings. I think she was pretty much shell-shocked at this point that she no longer owned anything, and that included a house. And despite the fact that her land, her furniture, her home were all confiscated, she, at this point, thanked God for the blessings he bestowed upon her. And as soon as Sunday rolled around, she stood up in her meeting and testified that she loved and trusted God in times of adversity as well as prosperity. And that's it's not as easy as it sounds. It's the correct posture, but it's difficult not to lick your wounds, as it were. So her siblings at this point stepped in. They were pretty generous, gave them, the family, a substantial amount of money. Although this was the case, they were forced to fold their bank entirely, relinquish the business, which was still viable commercially, tea and coffee importing business. They ceded that, as it were, to Elizabeth's brothers. And Joseph remained involved only as a paid employee. They were forced, obviously, to move from the country house, quite a big one that they had enjoyed, to a this is a drop in social standing, if anyone knows London, to West Ham. You may know it because it has a football team associated with it, but like a suburban home as opposed to a country house. And this home was offered to them by Samuel, who was Elizabeth's brother. If that's not bad enough, like the financial ruin and being close to, just without the goodwill of her family, she would have been destitute. Greater than that, excuse me, she faced public disgrace and dishonour. So 6 short months, or they may have felt longer, after they were declared bankrupt, or he was declared bankrupt, Joseph was formally disowned by the Religious Society of Friends, Quakers, obviously. Elizabeth was still permitted to participate in the yearly meeting and to attend meetings, but was obviously painfully aware of her diminished position within the organisation. She was still a minister, and she refused to abandon that part of her calling. Not long after this financial ruin, destitution, she ignored the cautions of her brothers and sisters, who insisted that it wasn't correct for a lady to continue this religious work, and she left for Stamford via stagecoach by herself in order to visit another prison. And a stroke is the thing that she finally succumbed to a stroke in 1845 and died. And her daughters forensically scoured the 44 volumes, if you don't mind, of her diaries, her journals, and they took out, they censored and removed all traces of their mother's weaknesses or, struggles. And biographers pretty much canonized her at this point. She was viewed by many of them as a saint. However, whilst the original unedited versions of her diaries, and the the portraits that were produced biographically nowadays in more recent times, they do, there's no condemnation in it, but they do divulge to us her flaws. At the same time, they reveal to us a more relatable, a more satisfying, if that's the right word, a more complex portrait of this. She's pretty amazing. To stroll into Newgate and and to begin educating and edifying, taking in the scriptures with her and proclaiming Jesus is it's up there in my book anyway. I don't know about your book. It was the uncovering or the rediscovering of these weaknesses and her character flaws by which we were able to relate to the truth of Elizabeth. She had anxiety and depression. If you know of it, if you know somebody who suffers from it, you'll know that this is no cakewalk. But her entire life was plagued with anxiety and depression. Not only that, her role as a mother and as a wife was a source of, I think, constant struggle for her. She continued faithfully in spite of the massively powerful machine of the media as it was at that time, the criticisms and the slander, quite frankly, of many people who disagreed with basically everything she did. From her parenting to her ability, her performing her duties as a wife, to prison reform, to being a minister, to speaking publicly. Every aspect was attacked. However, she carried on. She displayed a perseverance and a persistence and a courage that defied all expectations, including her own, I think, at one stage. She managed to endure and weather the storm of vicious criticism. She remained faithful and determined to fulfill what was for her God-given calling. It's good, isn't it? It's so good. God will often, I can speak for you. I'm going to speak for you anyway. I'm going to speak for me, definitely. He can often, seemingly out of the clear blue sky, he just drops something into your heart, into your mind, a calling. Like I've asked before and I've received. When it comes to that, I got, for the persecuted church, that was overwhelming, like, to say the least. That was until I made steps to what I'd agreed to what I'd asked for, to begin to do what God wanted me to do. I just couldn't rest. It was oppressive, if anything. Like, it felt, well, more real than real. And the thing is, we do have a choice, but the choice, God has a choice whether to save us or not, like, fundamentally. So our answer should be yes, and we should be doing it with, it's possible to have a happy heart whilst being utterly aghast at for Elizabeth, the degrading and dehumanizing elements of the prison system, or, if she'd have chosen the persecuted church, like, just the unceasing, like, wave upon wave of horrific, heartbreaking stories, like, certainly the ones that I waded through, they're not, you got a choice to say yes, and it's possible to do it happily, even though it's so saddening, because God's promises are true, and that's it. I don't know if you wanted me to extemporize, but I'm not going to. They're just true. Get over it, get on board, do something with your lives, if you don't mind. Lots of love. Thanks. Anyway, any comments? Plus, or not, it's fine also. But I have some stuff to be getting on with. So I know she's amazing, Jordan. There's so I know I did say to you could choose the next, but I'm not sure that I can share the link to you. We'll sort it out, but otherwise I'll screenshot you the list of candidates. But hopefully, please God, I get through all of them anyway. But yes, I don't know who's on the £5 note now. I don't think I've got a £5 note on me. No, I don't. It's probably a dude. Yeah, some guy. But yeah, she was. She's definitely, like, there's not enough attributed to her, because now female prisoners and the industry that surrounds the incarceration of women in England, whilst obviously like a million miles away from where she was, is still underfunded, underappreciated. It's such a small percentage of the overall prison population, but the ramifications, as I was saying the other day, are like so far-reaching for women. In contrast to men, like, they lose a lot more. Like, and it's not necessarily about withholding, not judgment, but some people can be very unsympathetic to the plight of prisoners, because of course there are people who in no way contributed to their like poor fortune at the moment. However, maybe the children of incarcerated women would fall into that category. So by default, you can all get on board with stuff like that. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. I feel like Forrest Gump every time I say that. Hello everyone. I'm not going to scroll through everyone, but just hello. If there is no further business, I shall be off ski for a short time, because I have uni work, I have lots of stuff, but if I don't think about it, it's not real. And I could just like eat some lunch, possibly, and then do all the things I have to go out and do. I'm going to take that as a yes, Kay. I'm going to take that as a cheers, love. Have a nice day kind of silence in the live chat. Jordan. Right, so I've pressed the first of the 2 buttons and speak now, forever hold your pizza. Pizza. No, I don't know what I'm gonna eat. Thanks, John. God bless you. Okay, it's my pleasure always. I will see you hopefully this evening. Depending on what time of day it is for you. Like hopefully within the next 8 hours. And yeah, God bless. I'll see you later. Ciao.